Hi and welcome back. We are ready to get into the cytoskeleton of our cells. And so within the cytoskeleton, we have, let me define what the cytoskeleton is first. The cytoskeleton is a network of protein fibers that extend throughout the whole entire cell. So I want you to think of us, we have something very similar. We have our skeleton is our bones. And what our bones do, they allow us to, they give something for our muscles to latch onto so we can actually move. They actually help anchor our organs in place and protect our organs. And most of all, they give us the shape we have. So that's the build you have is based upon your skeletal structure. Everybody's face is different, all that is all because of your skeletal structure. So much like our skeleton functions in those functions, the cytoskeletal matrix, the cytoskeleton in a cell, does the exact same thing. And so there's three different types of bones, if you will, inside of a cell. We have one type, they have three, but we are made of these cells, so that's us. So let's talk about the cytoskeletal matrix. So you can also call it the cytoskeleton. So this will be Roman numeral 4 in your notes. So we're finally back to Roman numerals. So cytoskeleton. So it's a network of protein fibers in the cell that allow for cell shape and maintenance. So there's three types of cytoskeleton fibers I want you to know about. So three types. And they all look different. They have different thicknesses, if you will. When I say fibers, I want you to think of threads or strings, but they're very tough. They have some weight to them, if you will. So there's three types. The first type we're going to talk about is called the microtubules. These guys, these are the thickest of all of them. When you're thinking of diameter-wise, these are the thickest. And we're going to go into their functions. So the microtubules, what these guys are, they create they're found in the cytoplasm of every eukaryotic cell. So all of these you'll see everywhere. But the structure resembles what you would think of as a hollow rod. So think of a noodle that is hollow and it's kind of like penne pasta. It would look like that, but very, very, very long inside the cell. So it's a hollow rod. Made of tubulin protein. So if you're thinking of like a hollow rod like this, all of these little pieces of tubulin are coming together to create the hollow rod. So it's tons of tubulin attached to one another. And that tubulin just keeps growing and growing and growing and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So the neat thing about microtubules is that they can grow and shrink accordingly. Because if I want to grow a tubulin, all I got to do, if this is where it's growing from, I just keep adding tubulin. If I want to take it away, I take it away. So the tubulin can shrink and grow. So hollow rods made of tubulin protein. Their main function is, actually, let's talk about where they grow from. They actually grow from a place in the cell called the centriole. So a structure in the cell called the centriole forms microtubules. Now, in every cell, so here's a cell, here's my nucleus and all the other organelles around it. Inside the cell, you have two sets of centrioles. You have a pair of centrioles right there. And what happens inside the centriole grows these microtubules out. And and they do all these functions, and they're just going to stretch out throughout the cell and do their job. What's their job, you ask? I'm so glad you asked. Here we go. Here's the functions of the microtubules. I'm going to erase this up here really quickly, so we're in microtubules, number one. One of the first functions that the microtubules has is one of the funnest, in my opinion. So this will be number 3, if I'm not mistaken. So functions of microtubules. The first function that we'll talk about, this one's adorable. Actually, no. Yeah. And so the first function in the microtubule is that it provides a guide or a track, if you will, for the transport vesicles to follow. So remember the transport vesicles we talked about just recently with the ER going to the Golgi and all this external maturation. Each one of those transport vesicles isn't just floating through the cell, you know, not knowing where to go. It's actually on a track, but there's something really neat. So the first function is it guides, and you could say tracks, transport vesicles in the cell. And here's how it does it. So if this is my microtubule, I got my hollow rod right here. And here is my transport vesicle that I'm holding, and inside here is my little protein, and it's getting like modifications on it. What's taking this transport vesicle along is this really sweet protein that's actually walking on this protein. So this is my microtubule. What this guy is called, you have this protein here, this guy, and it kind of looks like this. I'm not making up the shape completely. This is called a motor protein. So what he is actually doing, I like to personify it, what he's actually doing is he's holding up this transport vesicle and walking along the microtubule and taking this transport vesicle where it needs to go. Or is it going this way? I don't know which direction it wants to go. So it grabs the transport vesicle, takes it over to where it needs to go, and drops it off, and then it walks back over to pick up the next load. It's just constantly walking up and down these tracks all day long, transporting goods everywhere in the cell. It's beautiful if you think about it. There's some really, really cool videos on it. I'll upload one on our website. It's a really neat computer graphic representation of it, if you will. And the most favorite part in the movie with all the students I've ever had is when you get to watch the motor protein just travel along the microtubule carrying this huge load on top of it. It's kind of as strong as an ant. It could carry tons of stuff along it. But it's neat to think that the stuff inside your cell isn't just floating around doing its thing. It's actually guided. There's a purpose for all of this. And so they know where to go. It isn't just left up to, I hope you know where you're going, but they know where they're going. So that's one of the big functions for the microtubules. The second big function, there's 3. The second big function, and this is super important, is that during cell division, which we're going to talk about in a couple units, when your cells need to divide, you actually need to take your DNA and split your DNA as well. So you make a copy of your DNA, and you're going to set one copy in this new cell and one copy in this new cell. What your microtubules do is they grab the copies of DNA and separate them and put them in the new cells, basically. And so these help separate DNA. I'll say DNA copies during cell division. Now, when this doesn't work, we see lots of things happen, and we'll get to that later. And lastly, the last function of a microtubule is that it helps in locomotion. It actually helps move cells along. So it aids in motility. most famous moving cell, one of the only moving cells in the human body, in males at least, would be a sperm. So if you have a sperm cell and you have that long flagellum, this whole thing is made of microtubules essentially. So this is the flagellum. And it aids in movement so this cell knows where to go. Another situation would be like a gastro intestinal cell. You would have these ciliated cells up on top, and all this food and stuff is moving along. You would have a sheet of these cells here. These little cilia are sweeping back and forth, constantly clearing our airways and our gut and all that stuff. So these are constantly moving. That is made of a ton of microtubules. They're just literally extensions outside of the cell. This is also an extension outside of the cell. But it's covered in membrane, so it's part of the cell. So aids in motility, helps cells move and do what they need to do. All right, that is a microtubule. Next. I don't think that was a 3. Forgive me. I think that must have been something else. The second cell, or I'm sorry, not cell. The second type of cytoskeletal filament, or is filament, fiber, all these words are interchangeable. And so the second type of cytoskeleton is called I'm going to switch my notes here for y'all, is called a microfilament. Okay, whereas the microtubules were the thickest, these guys are the thinnest. And they look a little bit different because they also have a different function as well. So these guys are actually solid rods. They're not hollow this time. They're solid rods, and they're made of a protein called actin. So solid rods made of actin protein. So just another type of protein. So if you were looking at this one, it's a solid rod, but they'd be made of tons of actin. All these little actin pieces coming together to make this solid rod. Now microfilaments have a slightly different function in the cell. What these guys do, I want you to think of actin or microfilaments as the subcutaneous layer of a cell. So when I say subcutaneous, I want you to think of your skin. You have your cutaneous and your subcutaneous. That layer of, the bottommost layer of skin before you start getting to like muscle. That basically provides the framework for what's on top. So if you're looking at a cell, if I'm looking at a cell, here's my membrane. Actin is right underneath it. So there's my actin. So you could assume what the role of the microfilament is. This is what gives you that shape, if you will. It forms the 3D network inside the inside of the cell membrane. So it forms a network under the cell membrane. Forms a network under the cell membrane. The other cool thing about actin or microfilaments, in the molecular biology world and bio world, we rarely say microfilament, we usually just say actin because it's so plentiful inside the cell. If you could think it's underneath every single cell membrane, you know every cell has actin in that because that's what's maintaining its shape, if you will. So actin is huge inside the cell. But the neat thing about actin in different types of cells is that this actin can help change the shape of the cell so it starts to migrate and move to where it needs to go as well. So this actin can start extending to create these little, we actually call them fake feet, pseudopodia. So the cell starts to migrate and move. It's kind of neat. So that's microfilaments. And then the last one. So we have microtubules, we have microfilaments, and the last one are these in-between ones. So you have thickest and thinnest. Next one are called intermediate filaments. So the intermediate filaments, these form a different kind of structure, again another different function. So these create, these are, they're fibers made of keratin protein. They look a little bit different. They don't shrink or compress like or grow and shrink like actin and microtubules do. So these are fibers made of keratin protein. Now, these are very plentiful inside the cell as well. So I want you to think of these guys as extending throughout the framework of the whole entire cell. So if you're looking at a picture of a cell, so if I'm looking at a cell, you can imagine keratin is just everywhere. It is like spaghetti everywhere, doing its thing. And what keratin's doing is what it does, it provides a framework for the entire cytoskeleton. So the other two guys kind of depend on keratin as well. But what these are also doing, they're anchoring the organelles into place. So your nucleus, your mitochondria, your ER, your Golgi, all of the organelles we learned about, they're just not floating around in the cell. They're in a specific spot doing the function they need to do, where they need to be, thanks to keratin kind of keeping them in place. It's kind of like your ribs are keeping your lungs and your heart exactly where they need to be. Your skull is keeping your brain in there. Your bones do have that anchoring function to your organs. Same thing with keratin. So keratin provides the cytoskeletal framework for the cell, and organelle anchorage. Keeps them in place. Okay. That is it. There are more things you can learn about the cell. We're going to end there with our cell unit right now, so that is definitely the end of section 3. I have a worksheet for you to fill out for the cytoskeleton. When it comes to the organelles, we have those pictures of the cells, and you can use a visual to take notes and whatever helps you study best. We also have quizzes and obviously a test at the end of this section as well. But if you're curious about the cell, we've literally just scratched the surface of it. There's so much detail and so much beauty to be found if you dive deep into the cell. But I will spare you all of that now, because I'm assuming if you go on to study this longer, you will find out for yourself. But I will reassure you, there's lots of good stuff left to be learned. So come back after you finish taking your test. Good luck, have a great time studying, and we're going to get into our next unit, and that's all about energy and how our cells use energy, and how do we make energy, and what's our role with plants and how they do their thing as well. So we are very symbiotic. So thank you for joining me on section 3, the cell. I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.